Let's go ahead and get started. First of all, how the Skills Blitz came about was because when I'm here, we have several of us that are career counselors here at the in our Office of Training Education here with the scientists and NIH trainees. And there are usually several questions that we usually get all the time when we're doing our full-length mock interviews. And this is one of them. Tell me about yourself. The other two are, we talk a lot about behavior interviews and strengths and weaknesses. Seemingly those would be kind of easy questions. However, when you get ready to start practicing and talking them out loud, they're really not. And so I decided a couple years ago to just try taking one question, talking about it, and then giving participants in a workshop an opportunity just to practice with each other. And so that's basically what today's session is. It's a practice session, just to get you started. For more details about particular types of interview questions or more advanced interview questions, I'll be talking about some of the resources that we have and some of the programs on our OITE YouTube page, and also some of the upcoming workshops that we have a little bit later for more detail. But this is just basically skills practice today. Again, we're going to work on learning to practice your response to tell me about yourself. I anticipate the workshop today will be about 45 minutes long, maybe a little longer, but the idea is for you to get a time to practice. For any questions, any direct or specific questions, you can just address them to Jeff Mercurio or put them in the chat below. I'll be answering questions in between the practice sessions and at the end, so we can kind of get you to the practice, getting to the actual practice sessions that we'll be using. And at the end, for all of you that are registered, we'll send the slides, okay? So the first question that we usually have here is, why do interviews start out with "tell me about yourself"? Or why this question? Sounds interesting, but a lot of trainees kind of want to know this when I'm working with them. It really is it gives you an opportunity, although the interview is an exchange of information that someone interviewing you is taking the lead in, it kind of puts the ball in your court in a sense and gives you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the group. It also allows you them to get to meet you as an applicant for their job or their position or their graduate program. And I know we have participants that are coming that might be interviewing for grad school or industry positions. So it really gives you an opportunity for them to meet you. They also are listening to how you engage with them initially, because you're going to be interviewing and you'll be meeting to work with their staff, their students, any constituents or clients that they have, or even be joining and becoming a member of their team. So it gives you an opportunity to just let them know, hey, this is what you can expect from me when I'm getting ready to start talking about things. You also get a brief glimpse into how your prior education or experience is pertinent to that position or graduate degree. Okay. Tell me about tell me about yourself. This is the time to, again, introduce yourself. Usually just a lot of questions that trainees have is, how long should this be? And we usually recommend at least 60 to 90 seconds. It's not a long introduction. The reason why is often you'll have a short interview that might be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, and there's a lot of questions they have to get to. This is just a starter so you can get the conversation started. Again, I have this highlighted here, aspects of what you want to share and you feel is important for them to know. And I bring this up to you, to a lot of trainees. A lot of applicants interview as though, approach the interview in this question as if the interviewer has the answer sheet, like it's an oral exam, and you're trying to say stuff that they want to hear. In reality, so you can interview more authentically and comfortably within yourself, you have the answer sheet. And I'm just going to give you, through this workshop, we'll give you a few things that you might want to say that they're listening to get yourself started. If they want to know anything else, they'll ask you from there. So it really is an opportunity for you to talk about what you feel like is important for you to know. Introduce yourself as well-rounded. I also want to say there are some questions you might also hear that sound similar. Please introduce yourself to me or to us or to the group if you have a group interview. What would you like to share with you about yourself? Or what do you want us to know about you? Sometimes I have had trainees that they're interviewing someone that's very busy. They might seem a little bit less warm or engaging, or even a little on the cranky side. Sometimes they're coming in because they're busy working before and they're running in to interview you. And they might start off with something like, and I have this several times, like, why are you here? Or who are you and why are you here? And for the interviewee, for you, you're thinking, whoa, if they don't know why I'm here, should I be here? Sure, that's natural. But for you to get beyond that so you can continue with the interview, you can say, hey, you know what? Thank you for that question. I'm here today to interview for this, and this is a little bit about me. And that's how you can just kind of move forward through this. Okay, so I wanted to bring that up. A couple of nuances. If you're interviewing for jobs, internships in business or industry, and I know we have again, our population, when I looked at who registered today, might be current graduate students, they might be postdocs, a lot of you might be postbacks, or students that are interviewing for graduate study. If you're interviewing for jobs or industry, they really want you to introduce yourself as a scientist. I know a lot of you might want to think, well, what do I say? It's a big, huge question. So one thing we recommend is interviewing yourself in terms of a scientist and how you developed into that, focusing primarily on college, on your experiences from college forward. A lot of applicants might want to introduce, have people talk a lot about experiences prior to that or in their childhood or in high school. But by this stage, when you're interviewing for jobs, they want you to kind of come to them interviewing for a job based on college forward. They're also trying to assess a little bit of how your education and training is pertinent to that job or position or internship. They may ask you also as part of this question, or you could choose to briefly, is say how this position fits with your career goals. So sometimes they might ask either two separate questions or sometimes at the same time. Please introduce you to us and tell us a little bit about your career goals. And then you just know that they want to know what your long-range career goal is and how the position fits, if they ask it. And there's another question they may ask, I see it mostly, or we see it a lot in internships and jobs. And that is, can you walk me through your resume? And it's instead of saying, tell me about yourself, it might be either after tell me about yourself, or it might be instead of. What they're really saying is, can you introduce yourself to me and tell me about your development as a scientist? So you could start with saying, this is who I am and where I am, and then you can walk them through some of the highlights and steps that you have on your resume so they can see how you developed, okay? For graduate school, PhD, postdoc kind of, and research kind of positions, or professional school, it's a little different than the job or position. They'd like to hear, for graduate and PhDs, we also recommend introducing yourself and talking about who you are as a scientist and researcher, primarily focusing on that. An idea could be starting with where you are now. I'm currently for example, I'm currently a postbac or a postdoc here at the National Institutes of Health in this institute, and this is what I'm doing. Prior to this is how I got here, educationally and developmentally. So they just hear that part. They're really interested in you. They're also getting a brief, they may ask you for a brief snapshot of your career goals in this question as well. You know, what are your career goals? Introduce yourself and tell me what your career goals are and how this grad program fits. But mostly they're going to be asking you about introducing yourself as a scientist or researcher. We also recommend, and you might be asked this question, so I prepare you, is because of, in the interest of diversity and inclusion, they might want to know a little bit more about you, or you might choose to share something briefly with them, a little bit about values or something about your background, or additional interests or something beyond your development as a scientist and researcher, because they're bringing you as a cohort of learners or cohort of students that are coming to a program and not hiring you for one job, and they're trying to get a little bit of assessment. So it'd be okay if you chose to say something about that. For MD or PhD program is very similar, except in my work with preparing people for MD or professional school, master's programs, dentistry school, introduce yourself, but you might want to briefly talk about your background, focusing on college forward primarily, education, but in the beginning, make sure they hear a little bit about why you're interested in being an MD, or why you're interested in being a dentist, or why you're interested in being a computer scientist, or briefly where you got that from. This is different than going into your whole explanation and deep explanation about how you developed and how you become an MD or whatever. This is to let them know from the beginning of the interview where in your development this idea came in. So that's just a recommendation there. If you're applying for like MD, PhD programs, sometimes you might say, this is where I got interested in being a physician. This is where my research interest developed briefly, meaning, you know, you don't have to go into a lot of depth about it. That'll be further in the interview. Also, they're trying to assess, are you relatable to students and their staff, future patients, and do you have commonalities that you might have in a cohort? So it's okay to share a little bit more. I do have a couple questions that I have had during the workshops about, should you change your introduction if it's an open or closed file interview? And this is primarily for professional schools or graduate schools who are interviewing you. They might say you have an open file interview and closed. And what that means is the person interviewing you will have access to your application and will have all the information in there. A closed file means that they don't have any access to your information in your application. What should you say in this question? There's also another one that might be partial, open, partial, closed, meaning they might have a personal statement or something. I usually recommend, so that you don't have to be stressed out as an interviewee for these questions, answering it as if it is closed file and share with them what you want them to know. So you don't have to try to edit out what you're saying, thinking they already know it. When I have given open file or I've seen people interview with open file, often they'll say, I have your file, I'm gonna close this and let's just talk. And then it might throw you off too. So just prepare that you're just gonna answer the question and introduce yourself based on what you wanna know. And then later on, they'll ask you more detailed questions. The other question that comes up, and I talk about this a lot, because there are people, you who are interviewing come from a variety of different backgrounds, beliefs, cultures, and things like that. I, as a man of color, often we would like to share, or some of our earliest experiences or something come from family and culture. And often some of us feel like we're bringing family with us to the interview. The important piece I would have you think about with this is, it's okay to share a little bit, kind of do both and briefly about maybe one or two things you want them to know that you're bringing from family or an influence or something like that, but then move quickly into, after that, in college, this is where I started developing my interest in this and that, move them quickly into that, okay? Because they're interviewing you, in reality, they're interviewing you to enter the program, but sometimes it's hard to disconnect yourself from family. If you can and you're comfortable with it, great. But I don't want to feel like you just cannot do it. Just say something briefly. Okay. Okay. Tell me about yourself question is not a long presentation about yourself. I was working with several people in the past couple of weeks and they were preparing a 10, 15-minute presentation about themselves. It's really a brief, like I said, 60-second to a minute kind of introduction. To get the conversation started, you can always refer back to what you said when you're deepening it. It's not an in-depth discussion of your resume or application at all. It's more of a summary if they ask you about some highlights. It's not a long discussion about your reasons for pursuing an MD or a PhD or why this position, meaning a long, in-depth discussion about all your clinical experiences or anything like that. It's an introduction. And then if they ask you more about that later, like tell me about your development into an MD or something like that, you can say, as mentioned earlier, I started here, let me tell you a little bit more about that. But for this question, it's shorter, again. It's also not a time, even though sometimes you're naturally that way, to be shy or reserved. A lot of applicants feel like they're bragging or they're personally or culturally or whatever, you know, it's really not within their belief system to brag or talk about themselves. And I totally understand that. It's very hard to talk about yourselves. It makes it very awkward. That's why we're doing a workshop like this. But really what you have to do is just talk about what's your truth or what is really the truth for you. You don't have to embellish it. You don't have to make it like I'm the best at this that ever lived. But you can say, this is what's true for me. This is how I developed. This is what I know. This is why I'm interested. And then it feels more natural. Okay. It's also not a time to explain your trial or missteps into science or into this field. A lot of applicants I work with, sometimes they say, you know, how did you get interested? You know, they'll say, introduce yourself to me, and you'll start talking about yourself. And in that you say, well, at first I want to do this. And then I changed my major and I realized and I changed it again and I changed it again and I changed it again. They never really, although that is a way of interviewing or talking about yourself, they're not introduced to you, they're introduced to all the trial and error things that you did. If you want to discuss that, you might discuss that a little bit later. And that would be something you could practice and work on in a longer interview question. But in this one, try to just kind of stay with what's most pertinent and relevant at that time so you can move on to the further interview. And then it's also, in a sense, not a time to talk about other people, family, mentors, or your extended family, or things like that, because the reason why is they are important. Of course, they're important in your development. But again, they want to interview you for this position or this graduate program. And also try to be positive during it. If you had some experiences that might have been negative or hard, you know, don't dwell on those. You might just, or try to phrase them in such a way, but try not to present negative, because you're trying to think about how is this person going to be as a teammate in front of our constituents, like I mentioned before, in our graduate program. I want to say a quick thing before we practice too about standing out as unique or trying to have a hook. As you know, many interview workshops, you read them online. A lot of us in our profession, we say try to be unique or try to have something memorable, or like I'll say, have a hook. I always start off with, it's hard to try to stand out as unique if you don't know who you're interviewing with. Often it's just you have no idea who the other people are. So don't try to do that, or to try to have a hook and try to be totally memorable. And sometimes the hook feels a little bit like fun or shaky or whatever. In this professional field, it's your whole hook in reality will be what you have to say about yourself. Okay. You both of you could have been postbacks, but each of you came in the same lab, but each of you came to it from a different place and have different, maybe have different career goals and the things that are important to you. That's your hook, and that's you. So you don't really have to try to be super unique. Just say what your truth is a recommendation. Another quick thing before we go in here is, because it's an open-ended question, tell me about yourself, it drives applicants crazy because they're thinking, oh my God, there's so many things I could say. What do I say? I usually, a little mnemonic device or something, when it's such an open question, try to think about something that fills it. And I usually use a triangle. A lot of career counselors might use this, but it's something to think about. And a triangle is like, okay, so I'm at each corner of the triangle, I'm going to focus on. One corner will be the personal stuff, the brief background or values or something you think it's important for you to know. It might be, I think it's important to know that based on where I grew up this way and I developed a value around this, you know, briefly, something personal. Then the other triangle is briefly about your education or training or research or a combination. A hint for employers, talk about something in their science development or something relevant to the job. For PhD or master's students, talk about where you got your interest in the research that you're in, briefly, where you're interested in. For MD, I usually, or dentist or professional schools, I usually recommend, and I mentioned this earlier, that they hear from the very beginning, briefly, where you got that interest in being a doctor. So at the beginning of your interview, or dentist or whatever, at the beginning of your interview, they're, in a sense, hooked into the fact that you want to be in that profession, in that graduate program, okay? Otherwise, you might interview and say all these things about your background, and after you've talked for a minute and a half, they still don't know that you're interested in that program. It might seem obvious, but it's better if it's better, and in your kind of, it's better, and it's up to you to be able to tell them that. So if you briefly tell them that, then you can refer back to it even more and go and embellish on it later on in the interview. Okay, so we're getting ready to move into the practice session of this. I would like you to, I know I talked kind of fast through this, looking at this triangle model and thinking about what you're most likely to be preparing for graduate school interviews, med school interviews, or for jobs. Just take a moment quick and jot down at least 1 or 2 bullets for each one of these pieces of the triangle, so you have something to practice in a moment. So I'll give you maybe a minute to do that while we're talking. So think about or jot down something. If you want to share something personal, jot down say something about your education. I got my bachelor's here in this major here or whatever. And then I didn't mention this part about interests or hobbies or wellness. This is the other third corner. That's so they know that they're usually interested in, they know that not only are you well-rounded, but listening for something that knows that you are, you have more aspects to you than just your development as a scientist, which is very important, a researcher or whatever. You also have some other things that you might want to share. If you don't, you don't have to, but it just helps to round that out and gives a nice introduction to you. Okay? So jot down a couple bullets. And then what we're going to do when we go into this next skills is we have been recording this. And so we're going to end the recording now before we do the skills practice, and thank everybody for listening. But